Hello everyone, my name is Guido Diega, University of Stirling in Scotland. Today I would like to talk about the Internet of Things, and in particular how the world of smart devices, smart home, smart city can be used to manipulate us as consumers and citizens more generally. And I'm going to critically assess whether we can use the law, and in particular the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, to counter this phenomenon that I call the Internet of Personalised Things. This has both practical relevance because most IoT companies are now proclaiming to be customer centric, as if this was a good thing for us. But what I claim is that every time you hear the word personalization, you have to think manipulation, because personalizing our experience is also an opportunity for companies, in particular IoT companies, to manipulate us. It also has theoretical relevance because of its links to capitalism, what I call manipulation capitalism. Capitalism in general, even before obviously the IoT, the Internet of Things, has always been about not just producing wealth, but also producing new needs, in particular creating in us new selfish and alienated needs. I would like to quote, I think there's a beautiful quote by Karl Marx in his Economic and Philosophy manuscripts, where he wrote, under private property, every person speculates on creating a new need in another so as to drive him to a fresh sacrifice, to place him in a new dependence, and to seduce him into a new mode of gratification. So I would like you to just keep in mind this concept of capitalism as a system that creates new needs, then manipulates us to create new selfish, alienated needs. Consumer manipulation is something that predates the IoT. However, it becomes more pervasive and more subtle in this world of ubiquitous smart devices. In the Internet of Personalised Things, indeed, traders, IoT companies can personalize products, services, prices, and even the terms and conditions under which these products and services are provided. This is not all bad. There are good aspects in the IoT personalization, such as personalized medicine, like the use of smart toilets to analyze our urine with a performance that is as good as human doctors. However, apart from toilets, there's not much that I can think that is positive when it comes to IoT personalization. Indeed, the way that IoT companies can and do manipulate us affect our autonomy, freedom of choice, self-determination. And it's not just about what we buy, it's also about what we believe. As we can see, as we have seen in 2006, when Russian hackers and trolls were used to essentially swing the election and to favor Trump. And it also leads allow for forms of discrimination, like we saw when Facebook wasn't showing certain job opportunities to women and non-binary consumers. There are 5 features, I believe, in the IoT that explain why this socio-technological phenomenon is so prone to consumer manipulation. The first one is obvious. It's the amount of data that the IoT produces. UK smart meters, for instance, produce nearly 22 billion megabytes of data each year. But it's not just about big data. It's also about the network dimension of the IoT that allows its big players to track and profile users across devices. So now these companies can use not only our computer, but they can match that information with the computer, with the information produced by our phone and our watch and our fridge, to have a very clear picture of what we, who we are, what we want, where we want to go. There are increased opportunities to target consumers when we walk down the street in the smart home, when we go in the smart city, when we go back to our smart home, or simply using all the sensors and devices that now are increasingly in our bodies, in the Internet of bodies. And it's about targeting every time, all the time, and also targeting us at the right time, exploiting our vulnerabilities and our biases. For instance, using emotional recognition technologies, we know that Amazon analyzes our voice to understand if we are happy, sad, or other emotions, and based on that they will send us ads and other messages that can have the potential to manipulate us. And the fifth feature is power imbalance. That is again present it's generally present in business to consumer transactions, as in the IT field more generally, but that's exacerbated in the IoT, because IoT companies have control over our smart devices throughout its life cycle. So the question is, can we use the law to counter this IoT manipulation? My focus is on the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, especially after the 2021 reform that has clarified that this directive applies to any good or service, including digital service and digital content. The way this, I will say briefly something about the directive, because some of you might sort of not be familiar with it, but the way this directive works is that it bans 5 types of unfair commercial practices. Practices that are in contravention of professional diligence, misleading actions, misleading omissions, aggressive practices. And these four types, they are assessed, their unfairness is assessed on a case-by-case basis. And then there is a 5th type of blacklisted practices. There is a blacklist of practices that are unfair in all circumstances. So there is not a case-by-case assessment, but if a practice falls under one of the expressly mentioned practices in the blacklist annexed to the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, then the practice is unfair and hence illegal. I will start with the first type. That is the practices that are contrary to professional diligence. These are practices that are likely to distort the average consumer's economic behavior. And I find it interesting that I would say the leading authority in the field, the Rue Blanquart case, is about a scenario that is extremely common in the IoT. That is the sale of smart devices with pre-installed software. To many of us must have happened. It's happened to me that I bought a new phone, and this came with a number of apps that I wasn't able to delete, and that potentially qualifies as an unfair commercial practice. But the reason why I think this type of practices is actually fit for the IoT is that it provides specific rules addressing vulnerable consumers. So if a practice is likely to distort a vulnerable consumer's behavior, then it shall be assessed from the perspective of the average member of the group of vulnerable consumers. This in practice means that if the IoT and smart devices are used to target target a particular group of consumers, then it's going to be easier to find that practice as unfair. What does it mean to be vulnerable? Vulnerability can be due to ignorance, to necessity, to trust, but also to digital market manipulation. And one can be either vulnerable to a commercial practice or to the underlying product. So, for instance, if Amazon's Echo listens to me and hears me coughing, understands that I have a cold, and therefore targets me with relevant ads, this is a situation when I am definitely vulnerable. Vulnerability is often linked to credulity, and although many of us don't feel that like they are credulous, the European Commission clarified that any consumer could qualify at some point of their life in a particular circumstance as credulous and therefore vulnerable. There are then a second type of unfair commercial practices that are misleading actions. In particular, when an IoT company provides information that is false or inaccurate, then that could be a form of misleading action. It can be questioned whether we can use a misleading action to counter a particular type of manipulative practice. There is the practice of presenting IoT products and services as free when we are actually paying for them using our personal data. Arguably, the answer can be yes. Because in this day and age, when we refer to the concept of price, we should also include non-monetary form of exchanges, including personal data. However, I believe that to counter these types of practices, it's more conducive to rely on another type of unfair commercial practice, that is misleading omissions, because often these IoT companies, is not like they are telling expressly, giving us expressly misleading information. They are often simply omitting relevant information, or they hide this information about the use of our personal data in long and inaccessible terms and conditions and privacy policies. And I believe that accordingly, we can rely on the type of unfair commercial practices that go by the name of misleading omissions, because they apply to not only to omitted information, but also to information that is hidden or provided in an unclear, unintelligible, ambiguous, or untimely manner. It's important to note that when an IoT company is processing your personal data for a commercial purpose without clearly disclosing it, they are in breach of the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. This doesn't automatically mean that they are also putting in place an unfair commercial practice. However, the official guidance clarifies that data protection violations should be considered when assessing the unfairness of practice. A fourth type of unfair commercial practice goes by the name of aggressive commercial practices. Although the name aggressive seems to refer to violence or to forms, sort of traditional forms of aggression, actually, it refers to a number of things that, including undue influence, that I think is more relevant in an IoT context. It's more relevant because it's about a company exploiting their position of power vis-a-vis the consumer, so as to apply pressure in a way that limits the consumer's ability to make an informed decision. So, think about position of power, power imbalance, and impairment in the ability to make informed decisions. That's what we have often in the IoT, where IoT data is used to exploit preferences, biases, and vulnerabilities to target consumers in the moment, in the place, and in the way that the trader knows consumers to be more likely to take a transactional decision. So I think that these types of unfair practices are particularly relevant in the IoT, because the IoT furthers the power imbalance that characterizes most business to consumers relationships. And in particular today, after the reform of this directive, I think that these types of practices are particularly relevant because the reform has included the possibility for member states to introduce more stringent rules about unsolicited visits by a trader to a consumer's home. It's called doorstep selling. My claim is that doorstep selling applies not only to the physical home, but also to the smart home. So the use of smart devices in the smart home to make unsolicited virtual visits might be regarded as an aggressive commercial practice. And the fifth type of unfair commercial practices, and that's the last type, so don't worry, you can relax now, is the blacklisted unfair commercial practices. So if you read the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, after it there is Annex 1 that has a list of practices that are expressly unfair, and they are unfair in all circumstances. This means that they are unfair regardless of a case-by-case assessment, regardless of whether they lead to an unwanted transactional decision, for instance. And I would like to just briefly sort of present a vignette to explain what I'm talking about, to explain how blacklisted unfair commercial practices can be used to counter the Internet of Personalised Things. So picture this. Echo Show, there is the type of Amazon's Echo product that has a display, shows you a video about CryptoKitties. CryptoKitties are a blockchain game that you never heard before, so you never thought that you wanted to be involved in it. After an hour, another Echo product called Echo Dot reiterates the same message in audio form this time. Then you go to the bathroom where you have an Echo Look, and in the bathroom, Echo Look repeats the message to buy CryptoKitties. Then you go to bed where you have an Echo Spot that is like an alarm clock, and Echo Spot repeats the message, buy CryptoKitties. By the end of the day, you will be convinced to buy these bloody CryptoKitties. And I would say that this falls under one of the blacklisted practices, that is persistent and unwanted solicitations by remote media. It should be kept in mind that persistency has a very low threshold, as seen, for instance, in the Austrian Supreme Court case, where it was excluded that there was persistency only when there was a single letter to a single person. So if we go beyond that particular case, usually a repeated attempt to sell something by remote media, and therefore by using smart devices, is probably a blacklisted practice. So I would like to conclude by going back to Marx. So this idea that capitalism is about manipulating our needs. Not only creating wealth, but producing needs. Capitalism manipulates needs, that it creates consumption needs that silence those other needs that are actually important to shape our personality and that hinder the valorization of capital. For instance, the need for free time. I would say that IoT traders appropriate or attempt to appropriate and manipulate our free time and our most authentic needs. And to sort of agree with what Ugo Mattei has recently said, smartness is becoming the ultimate neoliberal tool to make us all more dumb. So to conclude, can we use neoliberal laws to counter neoliberal problems? I don't know, in the sense that we have seen how the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive can be, to some extent, invoked to counter the Internet of Personalised Things. However, it shouldn't come as a surprise that since this directive, like most EU directives, is a neoliberal instrument that is focused on the economic dimension of the consumer and in the internal market, its response to IoT-enhanced consumer manipulation cannot be entirely satisfactory. Thank you.